Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
We're glad you're here for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Your stool awaits. Sadly, we have no good martinis. We have three bad martinis and a little bit of craziness to start off the day. The only sliver of good news is that we're sponsored today by a brand new sponsor, Freshly offering our listeners $40 off their first two orders at freshly.com/martini. Much more on that a little bit later in the podcast. Jim, our wee bit of craziness, although it's kind of maddening now. What are we, about 2.5 months into lockdowns and social distancing and masks? Well, maybe not 2.5 months of masks, but it's been going on for a while now. And we had these guidelines all from the start, stay 6 feet away, be careful with surfaces, make sure you wipe everything down. And then a few days ago, the CDC says, I think for the most part that it's really just transmitted from person to person. Be careful a little bit what you do with the surfaces, but I really don't think that's as much of a threat. Now today, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, this is Fox News, edited information posted to its website last week on the transmission of the coronavirus from contaminated surfaces after the health agency deemed it confusing. Quote, after media reports appeared that suggested a change in CDC's view on transmissibility, it became clear that these edits were confusing, a press release reads. In its statement, the CDC said that it is possible to contract COVID-19 from touching a surface or object that has the virus on it and then touching your face, adding, quote, the primary and most important mode of transmission for COVID-19 is through close contact from person to person. Jim, we've been at this now for about 75 days by my count. Certain things should be pretty well established at this point. And right now, the CDC, which has already not covered itself in glory through the testing approach, doesn't even seem to have some of the basic facts clear at this point.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if are there two offices within the CDC who have two differing assessments, and that this is we're seeing some sort of the reflection of some sort of behind the scenes power struggle or something. I'm glad they recognize that when a message can be confusing. We've seen this on a variety of fronts, on the recommendation about masks, things like that. And the initial assessments of back in January, people saying, this isn't a serious threat for America. The flu is more dangerous, all kinds of assessments like that now do not appear to be accurate in light of what we've seen with this pandemic. And I realize this is a novel virus. It's called a novel because it's new, not because everybody's supposed to be writing a novel while they're stuck inside. And so I get that they have to adjust what they say. But if you're flipping back and forth within a couple of days, something went terribly wrong. Now, some of this is on the media, which might be drawing broader conclusions from their assessments than are warranted. I don't think any media went out and said, hey, it's perfectly safe, start touching the subway poles in New York City. Handrails and elevator buttons, don't worry, there's no risk from them anymore. Maybe that's the problem, what prompted them to do this. But boy, oh boy, going back and forth like this in a couple of days is not going to be good for having an informed and wise and public making good judgment in all of their little everyday interactions.
All right, well, let's get to the bad martinis, Jim.
That wasn't even the bad one, folks. That was
that was just the teaser.
That was the mildly frustrating one.
Oh, man. All right. Well, let's get to President Trump and his fight with Twitter. We talked about President Trump's Twitter habits yesterday as it related to the Joe Scarborough story. Well, now President Trump is directly going after Twitter because yesterday he tweeted out, there is no way, zero, that mail-in ballots will be anything less than substantially fraudulent. Mailboxes will be robbed, ballots will be forged, and even illegally printed out and fraudulently signed. The governor of California is sending ballots to millions of people. Anyone living in the state, no matter who they are or how they got there, will get one. That will be followed up with professionals telling all of these people, many of whom have never even thought of voting before, how and for whom to vote. This will be a rigged election. No way. And Twitter has decided this is the tweet that they need to correct. So underneath each of those two tweets, there's an exclamation point in blue and then a link to, quote, get the facts about mail-in ballots. Well, that did not sit well with President Trump. He has lashed out at Twitter. He has said that big action is coming without specifying what that is, although he seems to have hinted that some sort of regulation of tech or social media or something could be on the horizon. So, Jim, this is bad in a number of ways. First of all, free speech allows people to say things that aren't true, regardless of what you think about what President Trump has said. It's not illegal to say things that aren't true on social media or anywhere else. And so then you've got the idea of Twitter minders deciding what's legit and what's not. And as folks have pointed out, the head of site integrity at Twitter is not exactly impartial. He's got tweets all over the place calling Kellyanne Conway, Joseph Goebbels, saying that any state that voted for a racist tangerine is a flyover state for a reason, and on and on and on. On the other side, of course, you don't want the government clamping down on social media or free speech either. So this is a war that has no winners, it seems.
Yeah, this is a domino of each falling domino has some sort of worse consequence to this. I think it's safe to say the Twitter decision, putting up this fact-checking, little button underneath, stems in large part from the Trump's tweets about Joe Scarborough and the intern who passed away in his office many years ago. Once the widower came out and said, "Twitter, please take these down. This is causing unnecessary pain for my family. This is beyond the pale. The president can, there's just no place for this on your platform." Twitter did not agree to do that, but their response was, "We're very sorry about this, and we're going to," basically the subtext was, "We're going to do something." Well, here is something. And I think we have lots of reasons to look at this and say, this is not going to go well, because you fact check the president's statements. At some point, somebody's going to say, okay, well, Joe Biden said this and it's not accurate. Why aren't you going to go fact check him? And we've seen Twitter be very arbitrary and very capricious in the way they treat offensive statements and false statements. And when is somebody important enough to say that? Is it how about when you say something that is disputed but not resolved? And yes, the tweets from Yoel Roth, the person who's the head of site integrity at Twitter, really are not encouraging if you're a conservative. It looks like, okay, this guy is a typical left-wing guy who really cannot stand this administration, and who's really interested, and as well as Republican senators and folks on the right generally, very broadly. There's no reason to feel good, to have a faith that Twitter is going to be fair, impartial, balanced, or give anybody the benefit of the doubt on this. Now, of course, the president come out and then say, well, we'll clamp down on you. You try to censor me, I'll censor you, which is exactly what we want to get away from. If we don't like a private company that set up this platform and that you agree to use when you sign up for it, if we don't like them being arbitrary, we don't like the idea of the government coming in and saying, well, if you're, we're going to limit what you can say and things like that. It's a good way to kill Twitter. The only upside for this is that Trump says he's going to do a lot of things and then he doesn't do them. So my suspicion is that you won't actually see any government clamp down on Twitter or Facebook or any other social media network or something like that. I think this is Trump blowing off steam. Again, I think this is an entirely foreseeable consequence of the president choosing to go off on this now multi-day tirade about Joe Scarborough and this intern who passed away. It not only is false, I think there are people who hate Joe Scarborough who feel like this is out of line. There are people who support the president who cannot understand why he's getting obsessed with this. I think it was Vanity Fair said his friends are going to try to stage an intervention. Friends of the president up in New York are going to try to stage an intervention. Yeah, I'm sure that'll do a lot of good. But that's, it was, once he did this, once you stick your fork in the electrical socket over and over again, that at some point there's going to be some sort of response. You kind of wonder at some point, could this lead to the end of Twitter? And maybe would that be a good thing for the country in the long run? But it's one of those things where Twitter is now, after years of insisting they're not a media company, not only do they feel responsible for what's up on their platform, they feel responsible for what the president of the United States puts on their platform. One last point that I think I just wrote a corner post about that I think is worth keeping in mind here. Because a lot of folks who are, opponents of the president, or even some folks who aren't, outspoken opponents of the president, are like, when Trump says something like that, Twitter should take it down. I can certainly understand why people feel this way, but I kind of would ask people, if you take down the worst tweets of the president quickly, before anybody can really see them, or before many people can see them, who are you really helping there? Who benefits? I think if anything, it probably benefits the president. Folks who have preferred his policies and but have not liked his personal style, not liked these tirades that he goes on, have said he needs an editor. Well, in this situation, Twitter would be volunteering to play that editor and probably would be helping him in the long run, even if he found it frustrating that anybody was limiting what he was saying. So I kind of want, that's one of the reasons I don't think it's a good idea to get Twitter in the business of saying, we're going to take down this statement by the President of the United States. But there's really no reason to think either that the President will be reined in by this, that Twitter will be, fact-checking its tweets fairly or impartially, nor is there any reason to think, that if Trump had his way, he might very well bring in government regulation of this social media network.
All right, well, let's talk about Freshly, because that's our happy news of the day. Not only are they a brand new sponsor, it's a fantastic product. I was a single guy for a long time, got married in my early 30s, and so I know about pre-prepared meals, Jim. I spent a lot of time getting stuff out of the frozen food section over the years, but you know what? When I got this box from Freshly, I could tell right away something was different. It's only 3 minutes to microwave, let it cool for a couple of minutes, and it's really good stuff. I got 6 meals. My wife and I split them up, and we loved all of them. I mean, it was there was a chicken dish with some butternut mac and cheese with butternut squash. Usually not a favorite of mine, but it was excellent. There was another meal where it was chicken with what I thought was mashed potatoes. Turned out to be a cauliflower mash. And for those who know me well, they know that cauliflower and I do not get along. I could tell it wasn't mashed potatoes, but I actually ate all the cauliflower. It was that good. And then later on, there was a great chicken Livorno. There was a fantastic peppercorn steak with actually mashed potatoes, decent sized portions, and I think a pretty good deal as well. We got to try them for free, but this is a product that I think folks are going to really appreciate, particularly once we do get back to normal and you need good, healthy meals on the fly without a lot of prep time. So if you think that eating better means hours of recipe research, multiple trips to the grocery store, hours of monotonous meal prep, you don't need that anymore because you've got Freshly.
At Freshly, they understand that food needs to be delicious, healthy, and simple. Because let's be honest here, if it's not easy, I'm not going to do it. If it doesn't taste good, I don't want to eat it. Look at me. With Freshly, you can avoid the grocery store and enjoy fully prepared dinners delivered fresh, not frozen, right to your door. Put your feet up and relax. Freshly's chefs and nutritionists do all the hard work. All you do is heat for 3 minutes and the dinner is done. Imagine better for you golden oven fried chicken, creamy springtime risotto, and fall apart tender beef brisket. And that's just a few of the more than 30 health conscious options to choose from.
You know, it's a good product. When we had the conference call with the sponsor and they said, do you have any questions? And my only question was, can I get another box? Because that's how much I enjoyed it. So join almost 1.5 million satisfied customers and skip the shopping, prepping, cooking, and cleanup. Right now, Freshly is offering 3 Martini Lunch listeners $40 off their first 2 orders at freshly.com/martini. That's freshly.com/martini. All right, Jim, let's move to our second bad martini, and this one is just ugly on so many different levels. We take you to Minneapolis, Minnesota. The video went viral yesterday. It actually took place on Monday, where a Minneapolis police officer has a knee on the neck of a man later identified as George Floyd. He's just off the curb next to the car, and at first he's moving, and then he's not, and then people who are filming this on the sidewalk are screaming that he can't breathe, that I don't think he's conscious anymore. Do something, help the guy, take his pulse, make sure he's still okay. And for whatever reason, the cops, and I'm not saying this to be flippant, they're acting like pro wrestling referees, more upset about the people yelling than actually checking to see if the guy's still alive. He later died, and now the Minneapolis police chief has announced that the 4 police officers on scene there are now former employees. Major protests last night, thousands of folks in the streets, some rocks thrown at police cars and so forth. So this is going to create some tension for a very long time. Jim, I don't know what happened before the takedown there, but it certainly didn't warrant the fact that nobody cared that this guy was having the life squeezed out of him. So we're going to see what the response is here. I've heard some reports that the FBI may be taking a look at this. Whatever it is, though, this did not need to happen, and so consequences must be coming.
I think one of the things that is especially tragic about seeing this is that the echoes of the police killing of Eric Garner, and the way that I can't breathe, his dying words turned into sort of this rallying cry for protests and movements against police brutality. I also note this is in Minnesota, and you may remember that Philando Castile was shot by police when he was pulled over in St. Anthony, Minnesota. He was going to reach out to show his license and registration for a firearm. The police claimed that they thought he was going for a gun. I think the streamed video of their exchange made it look like the cops went from zero to shooting exceptionally fast. And also remember the Justine Diamond, 2017. This was a 40-year-old Australian-American woman was killed by a member of the Minneapolis Police Department. She had called 911 to report the possible assault of a woman in an alley behind her house and straight out shot the person who called 911. In that case, it was not necessarily racially oriented, but it was a case of police using excessive force recklessly and in a way that ended up in an innocent person being killed in a way that didn't really seem to make sense to most observers afterward. I don't know if this is, look, you can find bad examples of this all across the country, but it seems particularly troubling that this is happening, that you're seeing a repeated series of cases in Minnesota. And, you kind of you wonder, I'm glad that all 4 police have been fired. That's a good first step. I think criminal charges are absolutely, the sort of thing the FBI and other federal officials should be looking at. How many times does this have to happen? What is the culture within these police organizations where this kind of force pressing down on someone's neck, which is where they'll, everything you need in life is in your neck, right? Your arteries bringing blood to your brain and to everything else, your windpipe, your spinal column, everything important is there. So obviously, on the one hand, yes, it's a very effective place to disable someone. It's also a place you're very likely to kill someone or do serious damage to them. So kind of horrifying. It feels like history is repeating itself. Hopefully, this will bring some sort of lasting change to both this particular police department and maybe a heightened awareness of the dangers here in other police departments. But it feels like we're a long ways away from that, Greg.
All right, well, let's move on to our third bad martini now. And speaking of people filming each other, let's go to the Central Park of New York City. Central Park Karen, as she's known. Her real name is Amy Cooper. She was in the park with her dog, which is a whole other issue for other people on social media, how she treated the dog. But Christian Cooper, the fact that both these people are named Cooper just makes this story even weirder.
Yeah,
but
you use the first names. I think that's what most people have been forced to do.
So he's apparently a noted bird watcher in Central Park in the New York City area. And so he starts filming her. We're not exactly sure why, but the part of his video that has gone onto social media begins with her looking up and demanding that he stop filming her, and then it escalates from there. Take a listen.
Would you please stop? Sir, I'm asking you to stop.
Please don't come close to me.
Sir, I'm asking you to stop recording me.
Please don't come close to me.
Please take your phone off.
Please don't come close to
And
me.
I'm taking a picture and calling the cops.
Please call the cops. Please call the cops.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like.
There is an African-American man. I am in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog. And my... I'm sorry, I can't hear you either. I'm being threatened by a man in the ramble. Please send the cops immediately.
So, Jim, she flips out, wants him to stop filming. He doesn't stop filming. She calls the police, claims that an African-American man is threatening her and her dog in Central Park. She eventually loses the dog. She eventually loses her job. A lot of folks are calling her, as I said, Central Park Karen, that this is ridiculous and there needed to be consequences. You got other folks like Robert George, generally leans to the right over there at the New York Daily News, saying neither person cover themselves in glory here. You wrote about this to some extent in fact, most of the Morning Jolt today about how people are turning to self-righteousness to medicate during this pandemic, and this might be Exhibit 1.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here, and you could, the racial aspect is a big aspect of it, but I don't think it's the only aspect of it. Christian Cooper, the noted bird watcher, I'll admit I'm not big on the New York City bird watching circuit. He is, legally and technically in the right. She did have her dog off the leash. I think if someone says, "Hey, ma'am, you're supposed to have your dog on the leash," the right thing to do is put your dog on the leash, not turn it into a federal case and attempt to escalate it. But when she refuses, he then, like, if you're going to do what you want, I'm going to do what I want, and you're not going to like it. Well, that does sound a little bit threatening. And then he talks about, dog treats he carries around just for such intransience. This is like almost mob bossish, right? There's like, why are you walking? Like, apparently this is a guy who does have a persistent problem with dogs in his bird watching areas. So, arguably, you could make the argument that, yes, he did threaten the dog, or certainly his behavior could be interpreted as threatening. That having been said, she's being recorded. She doesn't like being recorded. Okay, I get, lots of people don't like being recorded, but he's not doing anything illegal in recording her. He has the right to turn on his phone. And while on camera, she calls up the NYPD, dials 911, and makes it sound like she is about to be attacked. It is a panicked, freaked. And the interesting thing is, because he's recording it, we can see space between the camera and her. He's got to be at least 10 feet away, maybe even more. And of course, the whole time she's yanking around the dog in a way that does not look healthy for the dog. And it basically makes it look like she is filing, if not an outright false police report, a severely exaggerated police report. And by the way, police showed up. Neither one of them were still in the same location when they got there. It was interesting. I talked to some women who were, reacting to this, who said there's a tone of voice that women can use that signifies intense, immediate danger. And that was very much in the tone of her voice while she's standing 10 to 15 feet away from this guy. And it does not seem to be reasonable that he's chasing her or anything like that. And she says to him very explicitly, I'm going to tell them that an African-American man is threatening me. And there's an entire context to that and you know what the NYPD will do when they come here looking for an African-American man attacking a woman. One of the things that Robert George put, I think was a very good way of putting it, is that de Blasio had said he wants people to rat on their neighbors, narc on them if they're violating social distancing rules, etc. And he pointed out that, back after 9/11, we were told, if you see something, say something. Now, people who listen to our podcast for a long time and remember our speculation about the Disney CTU will remember that a lot of times that slogan is, if you see something, say something, so that we in government can do nothing. But Robert A. George makes the observation, it's turned into, if you see anything, report anything. And while that's maybe a slight exaggeration, we do need to have some sort of perspective about what needs to be reported. And particularly when social distance, when the idea is that standing within like 4 feet of someone has now become some sort of problem. As I've been trying to say since the beginning of this pandemic, folks, 911 is not for this, right? The cops don't want to get dragged into, officer, I swear that those two people were 3 feet apart just a moment ago. We need to have perspective. We need to have understanding. Greg, I can't help but wonder, look, New York City has always attracted its share of crazies. It's always cultivated this culture of neuroses and tension and stress and this whole kind of New York attitude and in your face and all that kind of stuff. But I wonder, Greg, if you have people indoors for the better part of 3 months, are incidents like this an almost inevitable consequence? That everybody's on edge, everybody's looking for some sort of confrontation, that everybody is convinced that they are being uniquely wronged and that the authorities and the state need to intervene to save them from anybody who could be bothering them at any particular moment.
Well, you might have a good point there, because I think you probably saw the footage from, I think it was the Staten Island grocery store where the people in masks shouted the person without the mask out of the store. That's not to say that if that was the rule the store was urging, that they probably shouldn't have worn one. But I mean, that type of behavior is also beyond the pale. But we know that New York has its share of crazies. In fact, sometimes they elect a mayor. So what are you going to do? Wow, Jim, that was a rough day, but we got through it, and it's not Wednesday tomorrow, although it will feel like it.
Time has no meaning anymore, Greg. See you tomorrow, or maybe yesterday.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos, Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Don't forget about our great new sponsor, Freshly. Right now, our listeners can get $40 off the first 2 orders at freshly.com/martini. Please subscribe to the podcast. Leave us a kind review. Get us on those government surveillance devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast, and join us again on Thursday for the 3 Martini Lunch.